She had sold everything she owned to get here, and the man who promised her a new life never even showed up. Eliza Harper sat alone on that freezing platform, her suitcase beside her, her last dollar gone, and not a single soul in the world who knew where she was. The station lights went dark one by one. The last train disappeared into the Montana night, and still nobody came. Nobody. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The station master didn't even look at her when he turned the key in the lock. He simply pulled his coat tighter, tucked the key ring into his pocket, and walked away into the dark without a single word, as if she were furniture someone had forgotten to take, as if a woman sitting alone on a train platform in the middle of a Montana autumn night was simply not his concern. Eliza Harper watched him go. She didn't call after him. She didn't beg. She had already learned in the cruelest possible way that begging changed nothing in this world. She sat straight on that wooden bench, her spine rigid. Her hands folded in her lap, and she stared at the empty track stretching west into absolute blackness. The suitcase at her feet held everything she owned. 2 dresses, a pair of worn leather shoes she'd repaired herself 3 times, a small tin box with her mother's brooch inside, the only thing she hadn't sold. 47 cents, and a folded letter that had turned out to be worthless. She pulled her coat tighter against the wind and tried to count her mistakes. 3 days ago she had been in Boston. 3 days ago she had a room in a boarding house, a small job copying letters for a law firm, and a life that was not much, but it was hers. Then the letter arrived. Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Hargrove of Silver Falls, Montana Territory were seeking a governess for their 3 children. The position offered room board and a salary of $14 a month. The family came highly recommended through a placement agency in Boston. Transportation costs would be reimbursed upon arrival. It had seemed to a 26-year-old woman with no family and no prospects like a door opening where there had only ever been wall. She had written back the same night. She received confirmation within the week. She quit her job. She sold her winter coat, the good one, the one her mother had left her because she needed the train fare, and the letter had promised a warm western home. She spent her last $12 on a ticket west, and she arrived at Silver Falls Station after 3 days on a rattling train, exhausted and hungry, and trembling with something that almost felt like hope. The Hargrove family was not there to meet her. She waited an hour, 2 hours. She asked the station master if there had been any message. He checked. There was nothing. She waited through the afternoon. As the sun dropped low and the cold crept in, a boy finally appeared. Not Gerald Hargrove himself, but a boy of perhaps 14, shuffling his boots against the platform boards and refusing to look her in the eye. "Mrs. Hargrove sent me," the boy said. "I'm so glad," Eliza said, rising quickly, reaching for her suitcase. "Is the wagon nearby?" "No, ma'am." The boy finally looked up, and she saw something in his face she recognized. He felt sorry for her. That was the first sign. "Mrs. Hargrove says to tell you they changed their minds." The wind moved across the platform. Somewhere down the track, a loose board creaked. "I'm sorry," Eliza said. "The position. They don't need a governess anymore." The boy dropped his eyes again. "Mrs. Hargrove's sister came from Ohio. She's going to look after the children now." Eliza stood very still. "When did they decide this?" "Week ago, maybe." "They knew a week ago." Her voice came out flat and quiet. "And no one sent word to stop me from traveling." The boy said nothing, because there was nothing to say. "The agency letter," Eliza started. "Mrs. Hargrove says the agency doesn't speak for her." She opened her mouth. She closed it. The boy shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "She said to tell you she's sorry for the inconvenience." Then he turned and walked away. Eliza stood on the platform for a long time after he disappeared. She did the arithmetic in her head with the cold, careful precision of a woman who had always had to make numbers work. No job, no room, no money for a return ticket. No one in the world who knew she was here. She walked to the ticket window and explained her situation to the station master, a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and the look of someone who had heard every hard luck story in the territory. He listened without expression. "I'm afraid I can't help you with a ticket," he said. "And the station closes at 9. Is there a hotel in town?" "Hartley's on Main Street, $1.50 a night." She had 47 cents. "Is there a church, a shelter of any kind?" "Not in Silver Falls, ma'am." She looked at him for a long moment. "And when the station closes," she said carefully, "where exactly am I meant to go?" He looked away. "That's not my concern." She didn't argue. She walked back to her bench. She sat down. She thought about screaming, but there was no one to hear it. She thought about crying, but she had learned years ago that tears cost energy she couldn't afford. So she sat with her spine straight and her hands folded, and she watched the station master lock the door behind him without looking back. And now the platform was empty. The lamps burned low and yellow. The wind was picking up from the northwest, a mean searching wind with real cold in it, the kind that found every gap in a coat and made promises about what the night would bring. Eliza thought about her mother. Not with grief, she'd had 8 years to make peace with that grief, but with a kind of quiet longing. Her mother had been a practical woman, a woman who said that dignity wasn't what other people gave you. It was what you held on to when they tried to take it. Hold on to it, her mother used to say, even when it costs you everything, especially then. Eliza looked down at her suitcase. She thought, "I am 26 years old. I have 2 dresses and 47 cents and a dead woman's brooch, and I am sitting alone on a train platform in a territory I have never been to, and I don't know a single living soul for 2,000 miles. She thought, I have been in worse positions than this. She was trying very hard to believe that. The cold deepened. She pulled her coat around herself, the thin one, the replacement coat she'd bought second-hand because she'd sold the good one to get here, and tucked her feet up onto the bench to keep them off the boards. She told herself she would think of a plan. She would think clearly and carefully the way she always had, and she would find a solution, because there was always a solution if you were willing to work hard enough and be humble enough and keep your head. She told herself all of that, but the cold kept coming, and the lamps burned lower, and after a while, she stopped telling herself anything at all. She was so tired, not just from 3 days on a train, tired in a deeper way, tired from years of working harder than the people around her and still being the one who slipped through every crack, tired from writing careful letters and keeping careful records and doing everything right and still ending up here on a bench in the cold, invisible to the entire world. She rested her head against her suitcase, just for a moment, just to close her eyes for 1 minute, just to stop thinking. The cold wrapped around her slowly, the way it does when exhaustion wins, not as pain, but as something almost gentle, almost like relief. And Eliza Harper, the woman the world had left behind, fell asleep on a train platform in Silver Falls, Montana, with the temperature still dropping and no one coming. He almost didn't stop. That was the truth Caleb Morgan would sit with for the rest of his life. He almost didn't stop. He had ridden the long way into town specifically because he didn't want to talk to anyone. After 2 weeks alone on the far north range, checking fence lines and driving a small cattle herd back to winter pasture, Caleb wanted to collect his feed order from Garrett's Supply, maybe buy himself a bottle of something that would help him sleep, and ride back to Silver Creek Ranch in the dark. Alone. The way he preferred things. He was 41 years old and had reached the point in his life where solitude felt like the only honest thing left. He had tried other things. He'd tried caring. He'd tried hoping. He'd tried loving people with everything he had. And he had learned with the kind of permanence that settles into a man's bones and doesn't leave exactly what that cost. His wife Clara had died of fever 7 years ago. His daughter May had lived 3 months. He didn't talk about them. He didn't need to. They were simply the reason for everything that came after the silence. The solitude, the deliberate, careful removal of himself from anything that required him to feel too much. Silver Creek Ranch ran itself, more or less. He had two hired hands, Tom and Edgar, who were competent enough and left him alone when he wanted to be left alone, which was most of the time. The ranch wasn't thriving. He knew that. The books were a mess, the operation was inefficient, and Nathaniel Cross had been sending representatives around twice a year offering to buy him out at prices that were insults dressed up as business. But Silver Creek was his. Clara had loved the creek. May was buried in this meadow above the south field. Caleb Morgan would die before he let someone else have that land. He came around the south end of the station platform at just past 10 in the evening, and the lamp he was carrying caught something on the bench. He almost kept riding. Just a pile of belongings, he thought. Someone's luggage left behind. But the horse, a big sensible bay mare named Juniper, who he trusted more than most people, shied slightly, and he looked again. Not luggage, a person. A woman curled on a bench with her coat wrapped around herself and her head resting on a suitcase, and even from this distance and in this light he could see something wrong in the way she was positioned. Not the posture of sleep, the posture of collapse. He swore under his breath. He pulled Juniper to a stop. He sat there for a moment that was longer than it should have been, because he was a man who had learned to mistrust his own impulses toward other people's problems. He'd had enough trouble letting the world in. He didn't need more. But he got down off the horse. He walked over to the bench and held the lamp close. She was young, younger than he expected. Dark hair loose around her shoulders. A face that was sharp and fine-boned, and even in whatever state she was in, even pale and still and unconscious on a train platform in the cold, there was something in that face that said, "This is not a woman who gives up easily." There was a suitcase. There was a thin coat wrapped around her, and when he put his hand briefly carefully against the side of her neck, he felt the pulse there. Yes, but her skin was cold. Too cold. "Hey," he said. Nothing. "Hey!" Louder. He put a hand on her shoulder and shook once gently. Her eyelids moved but didn't open. He sat back on his heels and looked at the empty platform, the locked station, the dark town in the distance, and he made the only calculation that mattered. If he left her here, she would likely not survive the night. That was not a thing he was willing to live with. He gathered her up. She was lighter than she should have been, which told him its own story, and he got her across Juniper's saddle, and he climbed up behind her and held her steady and rode. Silver Creek Ranch was 6 miles from town. He rode fast. She woke to firelights. That was the first thing. Warm amber light moving on a wooden ceiling, and the smell of pine smoke, and something heavy over her, a quilt. And for one long disoriented moment she had absolutely no idea where she was or how she had gotten there. Then the cold came back to her. The platform. The locked door. The lamp going out. She sat up fast, too fast, and the room tilted, and she grabbed the edge of something solid, a wooden bed frame, and held on. "Easy," said a voice. She turned. A man was sitting in a chair by the fire about 6 feet away, turned half toward her, watching her with the careful patience of someone who has been waiting a while. He was tall, she could tell that even sitting, broad through the shoulders, dark hair touched at the temples with gray. A face that had been outdoors for most of its life, weathered and angular, with a set to the jaw that said not much moved him easily. He was watching her with dark eyes that were hard to read. "Who are you?" Eliza said. "Caleb Morgan. This is my ranch." "How did I—" "Found you at the station. You were unconscious. Cold." He said it the way a man recounts inventory, factual, no drama. "You need water." She realized she was desperately thirsty. "Yes," she said. "Please." He got up and brought her a tin cup from the table by the fire. She took it with both hands because her hands were still not steady, and she drank, and he sat back down in his chair and said nothing. She lowered the cup. "You brought me here." "Alone. Tom and Edgar are in the bunkhouse, if that's a concern." She looked at him carefully. He met her eyes and looked right back without flinching, and there was nothing in his face that looked like threat or strategy or anything other than simple, direct assessment. "Why?" she asked. "Why did I bring you in?" Yes. He was quiet a moment. Because you were going to die out there, he said. And someone should have gotten to you before that happened. They didn't. So I did. She waited for something to follow, that some condition, some expectation, some price. Because in her experience, that was always how it worked. Kindness from strangers had a price. She had learned that young. But he just looked at the fire. Is there someone I should send word to? He asked. Family. Someone expecting you. No, she said. He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. I'll take you into town in the morning, he said. Tonight you sleep. Mr. Morgan. Caleb. Caleb. She paused. I can't pay you. I know. For the room. For... She gestured vaguely at the quilt, the fire, the cup. For any of this. I'm not asking you to. She stared at him. This man was sitting in his own chair, in his own home, at what she guessed was close to midnight, having just ridden 6 miles in the cold to bring a stranger back from the edge of something bad, and he was looking at the fire, as if it were a perfectly ordinary evening. Why are you doing this? She asked. He looked at her then, and for a moment she saw something move through those dark eyes, something old and tired and very far down, and then it was gone. Because someone should, he said. Get some sleep. Miss Harper, she said. Eliza Harper. Miss Harper. He turned back to the fire. I'll be in the chair if you need anything. She looked at the chair. She looked at the man in it. You're going to sleep in the chair. I'm going to be awake in the chair, he said. There's a difference. She didn't have an answer for that. She lay back down. The quilt was heavy and warm, and smelled of cedar and dust and something that was simply old and solid and steady. She stared at the ceiling. She thought, I don't know this man. I don't know this place. I have 47 cents and a dead woman's brooch, and I am lying in a stranger's bed in Montana at midnight. She thought, he didn't even ask me what happened. She thought, he just helped. And something about that, the simplicity of it, the absence of calculation in it, made her eyes sting in a way that the cold and the hunger and the fear had somehow not. She closed her eyes before he could see it. In the morning she offered to cook breakfast. It was the only thing she had to offer, and she said so plainly. Caleb looked faintly surprised by the directness of it, which told her he wasn't used to people being direct with him. You don't have to do that, he said. I know I don't have to. She was already moving toward the stove. I want to. It's what I have. Let me use it. He watched her for a moment, then stepped back. She found flour and salt pork and dried beans and eggs from a coop she could see through the window. She built the fire up properly. She knew stoves had been managing a boarding house kitchen since she was 16. And by the time Tom and Edgar came in from the bunkhouse, she had biscuits and salt pork and coffee on the table. The 2 ranch hands stopped in the doorway and stared. Tom was young, maybe 20, freckled and surprised. Edgar was older, heavy-set, with the look of a man who had seen most things. Both of them looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at his coffee. Sit down, he said. They sat. Nobody talked much during the meal. She had the sense that talking much wasn't usual in this house, but both Tom and Edgar ate with the seriousness of men receiving something they'd been missing, and when she refilled their coffee without being asked, Tom said, "Thank you, ma'am," with a kind of raw sincerity that was almost painful. After while the men went to work, she cleared and washed. Caleb came back inside while she was working and stood in the doorway. "I'll take you to town," he said. "There's a noon stage east. It can get you as far as Billings." Eliza dried her hands on her skirt. "I have 47 cents, she said. He looked at the floor briefly, then back up. "I can cover the stage fare." "You've done enough," she said. "More than enough. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Morgan." Caleb. She folded the dish rag carefully. "I can't go back east. There's nothing there. The room I had is given to someone else by now. The job was a copying position that paid $3 a week. I left it." She set the rag down. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you so that you understand the situation clearly. He was quiet for a moment. What are you telling me, Miss Harper? I'm telling you I need work, she said. Real work, not charity. I can cook, clean, manage accounts, teach children to read and cipher. I saw your desk when I came through. He stiffened slightly. My desk. The papers, she said. I wasn't prying, I just saw. There were 4 separate ledger books open, and they didn't appear to reconcile with each other. A long silence. You can read ledgers. I spent 3 years copying legal documents in Boston. I can read most things. He looked at her for a long measuring moment. She looked right back. This was the moment she knew. This was the place where he would either find a reason not to help, because it was easier, because it required less of him, because strangers always eventually became liabilities, or he would make a different choice. The kind of choice people didn't always make. It's not much of a place, he said finally. I've seen that, she said. I don't need much. Tom and Edgar are decent men, but this is a working ranch. It's not a boarding house. I'm not looking for a boarding house. He rubbed the back of his neck. I can offer you a room, he said. Your own room. And wages. $6 a month. I know that's not what the agency was offering. The agency was offering 14 and they left me on a train platform, Eliza said. 6 is fine. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smile, more like the memory of one. I'll need you to know something, he said. What's that? This ranch has problems, he said. Real ones. I'm not in a position to pretend otherwise. You'd be walking into something that isn't easy. She looked at him. Mr. Morgan, she said. I fell asleep on a train platform last night in freezing weather with 47 cents to my name. I think I can handle difficult. This time, something did cross his face that was closer to a real expression. Fair enough, he said quietly. He put out his hand. She shook it, and that was how Eliza Harper came to Silver Creek Ranch. The problems were worse than he'd let on. She understood that within 48 hours. The ledgers were not just unreconciled, they were a disaster. 3 years of incomplete records payments entered in the wrong columns, expenses lumped together in ways that made it impossible to tell where the money was going or why it kept disappearing. She spread everything out on the kitchen table on her second morning and started at the beginning. Caleb came in at midday and stopped when he saw the papers. I didn't give you permission to. You gave me wages to help with accounts, she said, not looking up. This is accounts. She set her finger on a column. Who is Marcus Dunn? A pause. Supply merchant in Laramie, Caleb said slowly. Why? Because you've paid his invoice twice in June of last year and once more in September, and I can't find evidence that any of those deliveries were made. Silence. She looked up. Caleb was staring at the ledger with an expression that was very carefully neutral, the expression of a man controlling a reaction he didn't want to show. He's Cross's man, he said after a moment. Cross, Nathaniel Cross. He owns the Triple C spread to the north, biggest operation in the county. His voice was flat. He's been trying to buy Silver Creek for 4 years. And Marcus Dunn invoiced you twice for goods you didn't receive. Apparently. How many merchants do you deal with that have a connection to Cross? Another silence. I don't know, Caleb said. Then that, Eliza said, is where we start. He looked at her. She looked back at him, and for a moment she saw it again, that thing she'd glimpsed last night, that distance in him, that careful remove. And she also saw something else, a man who was very tired of fighting alone. The books are a mess, she said, not as criticism, just as fact. I know, he said. I can fix it, she said. But I need you to talk to me. I need to know who you deal with, who you trust, who makes you uncomfortable. I can find patterns in numbers, but not if I don't know what I'm looking for. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the papers spread across the table. "Nobody's asked me that before," he said. "Asked you what? What makes me uncomfortable?" He said it like it was something he needed to think about. "Tom and Edgar they do their work. They don't ask me things. I'm asking." He was quiet for another moment. Then slowly, deliberately, like a man choosing each word with some care, he started to talk. She listened. She made notes. And by the end of that afternoon, she had a list of 6 names. Merchants, buyers, a lawyer in town, all of whom had cross connections to Nathaniel Cross's operation, and all of whom had been quietly, incrementally taking money from Silver Creek for at least 3 years. When she set the list down in front of Caleb, he stared at it for a long time. 6, he said. 6 that I can document, she said. There may be more. His jaw was tight. He's been bleeding me, Caleb said. A little at a time. Not enough to notice clearly. Just enough to keep the ranch struggling. So you'd eventually sell, Eliza said. He looked up. He figured if he made it hard enough long enough, she said, you'd give up. Caleb's voice when he spoke was very quiet. He doesn't know who he's dealing with, he said. It was the simplest thing in the world to say, and it might have been the truest. Eliza picked up her pen. No, she said. He doesn't. She looked down at the ledger. But he's about to find out. Outside, the wind moved through the pine brakes that edged the north field. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk turned in the cold air above the creek. And inside that plain, struggling ranch house, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not with any announcement. Just the quiet, certain turning of the tide, the moment when a man who had been losing for years sat across a kitchen table from a woman who had been left on a train platform, and together, without fully understanding, yet what they were beginning, they started to fight back. The list of 6 names stayed on the kitchen table overnight. Caleb didn't touch it. Eliza noticed that in the morning when she came out to start the stove, the papers were exactly where she'd left them, but there was a coffee cup sitting beside them, still faintly warm, which meant Caleb had been up before dawn, sitting with those names in the dark. She didn't mention it. She made coffee and waited. He came in from the barn at 6:30 with hay dust on his coat and the look of a man who hadn't slept much and wasn't going to talk about it. He poured himself coffee. He sat down. He looked at the list. Marcus Dunn, he said. I've been doing business with him for 6 years. I know, Eliza said. I thought he was straight. He probably was, she said, until Cross made him a better offer. Caleb wrapped both hands around his cup. How much? Between the duplicate invoices and the inflated supply prices I found in the September and October ledgers, somewhere between $80 and $120 over the past 2 years. He was quiet. $120 was not a small sum for a ranch that was barely holding on. The others. The feed merchant in Silver Falls. I need another week in the books to be certain, but I think he's been shorting your deliveries by about 15% and billing you for full weight. She kept her voice even factual. The lawyer Holden reviewed your grazing rights contract last spring. I found a copy of the original and a copy of the version he filed with the county. They're not the same document. Caleb set his cup down very carefully. Say that again. The contract Holden filed reduced your access to the North Creek corridor by about 40 acres, Eliza said. It's subtle the language is changed in 3 places, and if you weren't reading them side by side, you'd miss it. But the result is that you've technically been trespassing on land you thought you had rights to. The silence in the kitchen had weight to it. That land borders Cross's property, Caleb said. Yes. If he wanted to press the claim, he could have had you in front of a judge any time in the last 8 months, Eliza said. He hasn't, which means he's saving it. For leverage. For the right moment, she said. When you're desperate enough. Caleb stood up from the table. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to her for a long moment. And she watched him and said nothing, because she understood that a man learning the full shape of how he'd been betrayed needed a moment to absorb it without an audience. When he turned back around, his face was completely composed. That frightened her more than anger would have. "Can you prove the contract was altered?" he said. "I have both copies," she said. "I need someone to verify the handwriting and the filing date. A different lawyer not from this county." "There's a man in Billings," Caleb said. "James Rourke. He's straight." "Then we write to him today." Caleb looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that recognized what she was doing and why. "You've been here 3 days," he said. "Yes." "You're already—" He stopped. "Already what?" "Fighting for this place," he said. "Like it's yours." She held his gaze. "You gave me a room and a wage and a reason to get up in the morning," she said. "That's more than most people have ever given me. I take that seriously." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat back down. "Tell me what else you need," he said. And they got to work. The days that followed had a shape to them that Eliza hadn't felt since childhood, the specific rhythm of useful work of problems that could be solved if you were willing to sit with them long enough. She built a new ledger system from scratch. Clean columns, clear categories, every transaction double-entered the way she'd learned watching the lawyers in Boston keep their books. She worked mornings at the table, and afternoons she helped wherever she was needed, and she made sure she was always needed somewhere because she had learned very young that the best way to earn your place in a house was to make yourself impossible to do without. She fixed the buckboard harness with a piece of leather cord when the strap snapped on a Tuesday morning, and Tom couldn't figure out why it kept slipping. She reorganized the root cellar so the winter stores were actually findable. She noticed that Edgar's right knee was giving him trouble and quietly shifted the morning chores so he wasn't doing as much kneeling without ever once making him feel managed. Small things. But small things were what held a place together. Tom started calling her Miss Eliza somewhere in the second week, which she understood was the highest form of warmth he was capable of. Edgar brought her wildflowers once without a word and set them in a tin cup on the windowsill and walked back out before she could say anything. And she stood looking at those flowers for a full minute before she trusted herself to move. Caleb watched all of it. She could feel him watching, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in the way of a man trying to figure something out about the world that he thought he'd already understood. On the 14th night, he stopped her in the hallway after supper. "The Whitmore family," he said. 3 miles east. They have 4 children. Youngest is 6. The oldest 2 aren't in school because the schoolhouse in Silver Falls doesn't take homestead kids." She looked at him. "I don't say that as a—" He stopped, started again. "I just thought you might want to know. Would it be all right if I rode over there? I'll take you Saturday." Saturday came, and Caleb drove her out to the Whitmore place in the buckboard without much conversation, which was their normal state, and which she had come to find oddly comfortable. The Whitmore homestead was rougher than Silver Creek, and the mother, a woman named Ruth, who was maybe 35 but looked 50, came out to meet them with a wariness that Eliza recognized. The wariness of a woman who had been disappointed by promises before. Eliza got down from the buckboard and walked straight to her and said, "I'm Eliza Harper. I understand your children need teaching. I'd like to come Tuesdays and Thursdays if that works for you. I don't charge." Ruth Whitmore stared at her. "You don't charge?" "Not for this." "Why?" "Because someone should have taught me sooner than they did," Eliza said, "and because your children deserve to read." Ruth looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Caleb sitting in the buckboard. "She always this direct?" she asked him. "Every day," Caleb said. Ruth looked back at Eliza. "Come in," she said. "I'll put coffee on." That was the beginning of the Tuesday-Thursday rides. Within 3 weeks, Eliza had 7 students. The 4 Whitmore children, 2 boys from the Garrity family whose homestead was another mile east, and a girl named Petra whose family had come from Germany the year before and who could barely speak English, but who learned to read it faster than children who'd spoken it their whole lives. Caleb drove her every time without being asked. He never came inside. He waited with the buckboard and the horse and his own thoughts, and when she came out after 2 hours, she always found him exactly where she'd left him. Not impatient, not bored, simply present in the way that she was beginning to understand was simply how he was. He was a man who, once he decided to be somewhere, was entirely there. She found that remarkable. She found him, if she was being honest with herself, increasingly difficult not to think about. But she didn't allow herself to pursue that thought very far, because she was a practical woman, and she understood her situation very clearly. She was an employee in this man's house. She had arrived with nothing, and whatever warmth existed between them was the warmth of two people building something together, not anything she had earned the right to call by another name. She told herself that every morning. Most mornings, she believed it. Then came the morning Caleb came back from Silver Falls with a bruise along his jaw and wouldn't explain it for 20 minutes. She was at the table with the ledgers when he came in, and she looked up and saw it and set her pen down. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing." "Caleb?" "I said it's nothing." Tom was behind him in the doorway, and the look on Tom's face told her it was not nothing. "Tom," she said. Tom looked at Caleb. Caleb made a small, almost imperceptible movement of his jaw. Tom sat down heavily at the table. "Cross's man Parker. He was at Garrett's when we came in for the feed order. Said something about—" Tom stopped. "Said something about what?" Silence. "About you, Miss Eliza," Tom said quietly. She was still. "What did he say?" Tom looked at the table. Caleb crossed the kitchen and poured himself water from the basin and drank it. "He said you were a woman who showed up with nothing and found yourself a comfortable situation," Caleb said. His voice was very flat. He said the comfortable situation was probably not only about the accounting work. The words landed in the kitchen like something dropped from a height. Eliza felt heat rise in her face, not embarrassment. Fury. "And you hit him," she said. "I suggested he correct his language," Caleb said. "He declined. Then I hit him." She stood up from the table. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. He turned. "Excuse me." "You shouldn't have hit him," she said. "Not because he didn't deserve it. He did. But because now Cross has something to use. Now it looks like—" She stopped. Breathed. "Now it looks like you have a personal stake in defending my reputation, which gives the story more weight than it deserves." Caleb stared at her. "You're telling me I should have let him say that about you. I'm telling you," she said carefully and clearly, "that I am a grown woman who has been managing her own reputation in difficult circumstances since she was 16 years old, and I don't need you to bleed for it." A long silence. Tom appeared to be studying the wall with great intensity. "I didn't do it for strategy," Caleb said finally. His voice had changed something underneath it that wasn't anger. "I know that," she said. "Then why?" "Because it will be used against you," she said. "Against this ranch, against everything we've been building for the past 3 weeks." She looked at him directly. "I need you to let me handle my own battles, Caleb. I need you to trust that I can." He held her gaze for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. "He was wrong," Caleb said, quiet, final. "Yes," she said. "He was, and I know that, and you know that." She didn't look away. "That has to be enough." Something moved through his expression that she couldn't entirely name. Then he nodded once and went back out. Tom let out a long, slow breath. "First time I've ever seen anyone talk him down when he's like that," Tom said. Eliza sat back down at the table and picked up her pen. Her hand was perfectly steady. The rest of her was not. The story got around Silver Falls faster than Eliza would have liked. Not the fight that part they managed to contain, but the broader version, the one Cross had clearly been seeding since before Parker opened his mouth, the story of a woman from nowhere who had appeared at Silver Creek and made herself indispensable and whose motives were not what they seemed. She heard it for the first time from Ruth Whitmore on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, delivered with the apologetic directness of a woman who thought Eliza deserved to know. "People in town are talking," Ruth said. She kept her voice low, though the children were outside. "Cross has been telling anyone who'll listen that you came here with a plan, that you targeted Caleb because he's alone and the ranch has land." Eliza was quiet. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "do you believe that—" Ruth looked at her steadily. "No," she said. "I watched you teach my girl to read her name last Thursday and cry about it when she thought nobody was looking. That's not a woman running a scheme." "Thank you," Eliza said. "But other people haven't seen what I've seen," Ruth said. "And Cross has money and history in this county. His word carries weight." Eliza rode back to Silver Creek that afternoon in silence, and when Caleb asked her what Ruth Whitmore had said to make her quiet, she told him. All of it. He listened without expression. Then he said, "Does it bother you, what they're saying?" She thought about it honestly. "It bothers me that it could hurt you," she said. "That it could hurt the ranch, the work we've been doing." "I asked if it bothers you," he said. She looked at him. "People have always had an opinion about me," she said. "In Boston, I was the charity case who should have been more grateful. On the train west, I was the foolish girl who believed a letter. At the station, I was nobody at all." She folded her hands in her lap. "I've learned not to let other people's opinions decide what I know about myself." Caleb drove for a moment without speaking. "My wife used to say something like that," he said. It was the first time he had mentioned her. Eliza didn't move, didn't respond too quickly, didn't do anything that would make him feel observed. "She was braver than me in most ways," he said. "Clara. She didn't spend much time on what the world thought about her." A pause. "I admired that." "She sounds like she was remarkable," Eliza said. "She was," he said. "Quiet. Simple. The way you say a thing that is so true, it doesn't need decoration." They rode the last mile in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. The kind that holds something rather than hiding it. The letter from James Rourke in Billings arrived on the 1st of November. Eliza read it twice at the kitchen table before she said anything. Caleb was on the other side of the room mending a bridle, and she knew he was watching her face, so she kept it neutral while she read. When she was done, she set the letter down. "He confirms it," she said. "The contract was altered. The filing date on Holden's version is fraudulent. Rourke knows the county clerk, and he says the original filing date was a full 6 weeks before Holden told you it was submitted, which means Holden held the document and made changes after you signed." Caleb set the bridle down. "That's criminal," he said. "Yes," she said. "Rourke believes there's grounds for charges against Holden and potentially against whoever directed him. He says he needs you to come to Billings to swear an affidavit and bring both copies of the contract." "When?" "As soon as possible. He says Cross may not know yet that we have both copies. If he finds out, he might move to file the falsified version through a different channel before we can challenge it." Caleb stood up. "I'll leave tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll have the documents organized tonight." He looked at her across the room. "Eliza," he said. She looked up. "When I hired you," he said, "I thought I was doing you a favor." She waited. "I was wrong about that," he said. She held his gaze. "We're doing each other one," she said. He nodded slowly. And then he went to get his coat because there were things to prepare a trip to plan and the work of saving a place that two people had quietly, without either of them naming it, begun to love together. He was gone for 4 days. Those 4 days were the longest Eliza had experienced since arriving at Silver Creek, and she understood that with a clarity that was slightly alarming. She kept busy, which was her solution to most problems. She finished reorganizing the supply records. She taught her Tuesday class. She helped Tom repair a section of fence that had been weak since summer, but the house was different when Caleb wasn't in it. Not empty in the way it probably was before she arrived. Different. Quieter in a specific way, the way a room feels when one particular person's presence is missing from it. She noticed it and filed it away and did not examine it too closely. Edgar noticed that she noticed. He said nothing about it because Edgar was not a man who said much, but on the second evening he brought a fresh pot of coffee to where she was working at the table and set it down and said, "He'll be back Thursday." She looked up. "I know," she said. "Just saying," Edgar said and walked back to his chair. She looked at her ledgers. She thought, "I have been here 6 weeks." She thought 6 weeks is not long enough to feel like this about someone's absence. She thought, "I should be more careful." She was not particularly successful at being more careful. Caleb came back Thursday evening as Edgar predicted, and she heard Juniper in the yard before she saw him, and she sat very deliberately at the table and did not get up. She heard him come in. She heard him stop in the kitchen doorway. "It worked," he said. She looked up. He looked different, not changed, but lighter in some way she couldn't fully account for, as if something he'd been carrying for months had shifted. "Rourke filed the affidavit," he said. "The county judge issued a corrective order on the grazing rights contract. Holden is under investigation." He moved into the kitchen. "And Rourke found something else." "What?" Caleb sat down across from her. "2 other ranchers in the county had contracts with Holden in the past 3 years," he said. "Both of them lost grazing rights they thought they had. Both sold within 18 months. He looked at her. "Both sold to Cross." The silence was absolute. "He's done this before," Eliza said. "Twice that we know of," Caleb said. "Rourke is looking for more." "This isn't just about Silver Creek," she said. "No," Caleb said. "It's not." She looked at him. "He's going to know we went to Billings," she said. "He's going to know what Rourke found." "Yes," Caleb said. "He's going to come back harder." "Yes," Caleb said again. "He is." She looked at the ledger in front of her, weeks of work, careful and meticulous, every piece of evidence documented, every transaction traced. "Then we make sure we're ready," she said. Caleb leaned back in his chair and looked at her across the kitchen table in the lamplight, and what she saw in his face was something she didn't have a simple word for. It was not the look of an employer. It was not the look of a man who had taken in a stranger and was being responsible about it. It was something quieter and more dangerous than either of those things. Something that looked, if she was honest, and she was trying very hard not to be, because honesty in this direction led somewhere she wasn't sure either of them was ready for, something that looked very much like the beginning of trust. "Eliza," he said. "Don't," she said quietly. He stopped. She looked at her ledger. "Not yet," she said. "Let's finish what we started first." A long pause. "All right," he said, and they sat together at the kitchen table, and the lamp burned low between them, and outside the Montana night was cold and deep, and full of the particular silence of a place that is beginning slowly, imperfectly, with 2 people who are both afraid, and both choosing to be there anyway, to become a home. The first thing Cross did was go after the children, not directly. He was too careful for that, too practiced in the particular art of hurting people without leaving fingerprints. But on the Wednesday after Caleb returned from Billings, Eliza arrived at the Whitmore homestead for her Tuesday class 1 day late because of a broken buckboard wheel, and found Ruth Whitmore standing in the yard with her arms crossed and her face tight. "Ruth," Eliza said, climbing down. "What's wrong?" Ruth looked past her at Caleb, still up on the buckboard seat, then back at Eliza. "A man came by Monday," Ruth said, "from the county." "What man?" "Said he was from the county education board." Ruth's voice was flat and careful. "Said there had been a complaint filed about an unlicensed teacher operating in the area. Said if I allowed my children to continue attending an unauthorized instruction session, it could affect our homestead application." The words landed like a slap. "Your homestead application," Eliza repeated. "We've been filing for 3 years," Ruth said. "If there's any mark against us, any official complaint, we could lose everything we've built here." Eliza was quiet for a moment. "Did this man give you his name?" "Henderson. Arthur Henderson." "Did he give you any paperwork, any official filing?" Ruth hesitated. "He said it would come by mail." "It won't," Eliza said, "because there's no complaint. There's no county education board in Silver Falls. The nearest one is in Billings, and they have no jurisdiction over private instruction on private property." She kept her voice steady. "Someone sent that man to frighten you." Ruth looked at her for a long moment. "Cross," she said. "Most likely." Ruth's jaw tightened. "He wants you to stop teaching. He wants me isolated," Eliza said. "Teaching gives me standing in this community. People trust me. He wants that gone." Ruth stood very still. Then she said, "My daughter read a full page out loud last Thursday. First time in her life." "I know," Eliza said. "I was there." "You come back Thursday," Ruth said, "and bring whoever else wants to learn." Eliza looked at her. "Ruth, if there's real risk to your homestead application, let me worry about my homestead," Ruth said. "You just bring the books." Caleb said nothing on the drive back, but somewhere along the second mile he reached over without looking at her and put his hand briefly over hers, where it rested on the seat, and then took it back and kept driving, and Eliza looked at the road ahead and felt something tighten in her chest that had nothing to do with anger. The second thing Cross did was faster and crueler. Garrett's Supply in Silver Falls had been Caleb's primary merchant for 9 years. Walt Garrett was a careful man, not warm exactly, but straight, the kind of merchant who didn't cheat you and didn't much care who you were as long as your money was good. On the Friday of that same week, Tom went into town for the monthly supply run and came back with an empty buckboard and a face like a man who'd delivered bad news before and hated it every time. Eliza and Caleb were both in the yard when he came in. "Walt won't sell to us," Tom said. He said it fast like ripping a bandage. "Said he's had a change in suppliers and his new contract won't allow him to carry credit accounts for certain operations." "Certain operations," Caleb said. "That's the word he used. Certain operations." "Did he say who the new supplier is?" Tom looked at the buckboard. "Cross's brother-in-law runs a supply house in Cheyenne." Nobody spoke for a moment. Cross had bought Garrett's supplier contract. He had restructured it specifically to exclude Silver Creek. It was legal, it was clean, and it meant that Caleb's nearest merchant, 9 years of relationship, was now effectively closed to him. "There's a supply house in Dunmore," Eliza said. 40 miles. "I know it," Caleb said. "Prices are higher and the road's bad in winter." "It's still a road," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. "It's still a road," she said again firmly. He nodded once. "Tom will make the Dunmore run next week. Give me a full inventory list by Sunday." Tom nodded and went to unhitch the horse, and Eliza walked back inside and stood at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood and breathed for a moment. She was not afraid, she told herself. She was not going to be afraid. But she understood with cold clarity that Cross was not testing them anymore. He was moving systematically. The fake education board official. Garrett's. These were pieces of a larger design, and a man with Cross's resources and patience didn't stop until the target broke or he ran out of pieces. He had not run out of pieces. The third blow came from inside the house, or rather from inside the county bank. She was working through the November supply ledger when she found the loan document she hadn't seen before, tucked in the back of a file she'd already reviewed, which meant it had been placed there after she'd started organizing the records. Or she had missed it the first time, which was possible, but felt wrong. She read it 3 times. Then she set it on the table and sat with it for a long time before Caleb came in for supper. "I found this," she said when he walked through the door. He came and looked at it. His face changed. "Where did you—" "In the back file, behind the spring correspondence." She kept her voice neutral. "Caleb, this is a loan document, dated March of last year. Silver Creek Ranch is listed as collateral against a note of $400 with the Silver Falls Territorial Bank." "I know what it is," he said. She looked at him. You knew about this loan. Yes. You didn't tell me. He pulled out a chair and sat down. And the way he did it, the weight of it, the deliberateness told her this was something he'd been carrying for a while. I took the loan before you came, he said. Last spring. I needed to cover a cattle loss from the winter. I lost nearly 30 head to a late freeze. I needed operating money to get through to fall. The bank that holds this note, she said carefully. The Silver Falls Territorial Bank. Yes. Do you know who sits on the board of the Silver Falls Territorial Bank? He looked at her, and she watched him understand. Cross, he said. Cross's brother-in-law chairs the board, she said. The same brother-in-law whose supply house in Cheyenne just acquired Garrett's supplier contract. The silence stretched out between them. The loan comes due in February, she said. $400 plus interest. If you can't pay. He calls the collateral, Caleb said. He doesn't even need to call it, Eliza said. He just has to wait. If the ranch can't make the note, the bank forecloses and Cross buys the debt for cents and takes the land. She folded her hands. He didn't need Holden's fake contract. He was always going to do it this way. The contract was the backup plan. Caleb stood up. He walked across the kitchen. He stood at the far wall with his back to her and said nothing for nearly a full minute. She waited. $400, he said finally. By February. Yes. We don't have $400. I know. He turned around. His face was controlled, but his eyes were not. I built this place, he said. Every fence post, every beam. I built this place, and I buried my daughter in the meadow on the south side, and I have spent 7 years keeping it together with nothing but... He stopped. His voice had roughed up at the edges. He pulled it back. He's not getting this land. No, she said. He's not. Eliza. He looked at her. How? She held his gaze. The cattle you have now, she said. How many head are ready for market? Maybe 60? 65. At current prices, that's worth... Not 400. Maybe 250, 270 if the market holds. Then we need another source. She picked up her pen. The school. Ruth Whitmore has contacts with 3 other homestead families who've asked about sending their children. If I formalize the instruction, not an official school, but a subscription arrangement where families pay a small monthly fee, it won't make up the difference, but it helps. It won't be enough. No, she agreed. Not alone. She was quiet for a moment. Rourke, in Billings. He mentioned that the evidence against Holden might constitute a civil claim that the ranchers who lost land through the altered contracts might have grounds to pursue damages. Caleb stared at her. Rourke said that, in his letter, I didn't mention it because I didn't know yet about the loan. But if there's a civil claim, and if it moved quickly enough, civil cases take months, Caleb said. We don't have months. We have until February. She knew that. She sat with the problem for a moment. Then she said something she hadn't planned to say. My mother's brooch, she said. He looked at her sharply. No, he said. It's gold and garnets. It's probably worth... No, he said again. And his voice was different now, not hard, but something that was almost protective, almost fierce. Absolutely not. You will not sell your mother's brooch for my loan. It's not... Eliza. He crossed back to the table and stood close enough that she had to look up at him. I need you to hear me. You came here with nothing, and you've given this place more than you should have already. You will not give it that. She looked up at him. He was close, and his voice was low, and there was something in his face that she had been carefully not looking at directly for weeks now. She allowed herself to look at it directly. It was not gratitude. It was not the decency of an employer. It was something that was watching her with a quiet, careful, almost frightened intensity, the look of a man who has spent a very long time not feeling things, and has recently discovered to his great inconvenience that he has started feeling one. Caleb, she said. Don't argue with me about the brooch, he said. I wasn't going to, she said quietly. A pause. He took a step back. He sat down. They both looked at the ledger. "We find another way," he said. "We find another way," she agreed. What they found in the end began with Edgar. Edgar, who said almost nothing, who mended things and moved quietly through the edges of the household, and had been at Silver Creek longer than anyone except Caleb Edgar, appeared in the kitchen doorway on a Sunday morning while Eliza was doing accounts, and Caleb was mending tack, and said with no preamble whatsoever, "Whitfield." They both looked at him. "Daniel Whitfield," Edgar said. "Runs the Double Fork east of Dunmore. He's been looking to buy quality bred stock for 2 years. Lost his breeding pair in a river crossing last spring." Caleb was very still. "Silver Creek's breeding stock," Caleb said. "Your gray bull is worth at least 150 to the right buyer," Edgar said. "And the 2 mares you've been holding from market are quality. Whitfield will know it. Those are the animals I've been building the next generation of stock from," Caleb said. "I know," Edgar said. "But Whitfield's a straight man. He'll pay fair. And if you tell him why you're selling, he might be persuaded to offer first right of purchase on offspring when things settle." It was the most Edgar had said in one stretch in the entire time Eliza had been at Silver Creek. Caleb looked at him. "You've been thinking about this," Caleb said. "Week or so," Edgar said, and went back outside. Caleb turned to Eliza. She spread her hands. "He's right," she said. "It's painful, but it's right." "That's the future of the herd," Caleb said. "The future of the herd doesn't matter if there's no herd to have a future," she said. He looked at the table for a long moment. Then he said, "Write to Whitfield." She wrote the letter that afternoon. The response came in 8 days. Whitfield would come to Silver Creek the following Saturday to inspect the animals, and if they were as represented, he would pay in cash at the time of agreement. He came on Saturday. He was a big man, weather-hardened with a handshake that meant something, and he walked the animals with Caleb for an hour, while Eliza waited inside, going over numbers she'd already gone over a dozen times, because that was what she did when she was anxious and didn't want to show it. When they came back inside, Whitfield pulled off his hat and looked at Eliza. "You must be the one running the books," he said. "I am," she said. "Caleb says you're the one who found the Holden situation. We found it together," she said. Whitfield looked at Caleb. "Smart woman," he said. "I know it," Caleb said. She kept her face neutral. Whitfield sat down. "I'll give you 160 for the gray bull and 110 for both mares. That's my fair number, and I won't bargain it down." $270, combined with the market cattle that was close, very close. "I'll need it by early February," Caleb said. "I can have cash here by the end of the month," Whitfield said. Caleb put out his hand. Whitfield shook it. Eliza let out a breath so carefully that neither of them heard it. It wasn't over. They still needed the difference. But it was the first concrete piece, the first real solid thing they'd built against Cross's plan, and she felt it like ground under her feet after a long time of standing on ice. What she didn't know, sitting at that table feeling the first real relief in weeks, was that Nathaniel Cross had been watching the Whitfield visit. Or rather, someone who reported to Cross had been watching. And Cross did not respond to setbacks by backing down. He responded by escalating. The fire started on a Tuesday night in the first week of December. Eliza smelled it before she heard anything. A sharp, foreign smell cutting through the cold that reached her, even in her room with the window shut, and she was up and dressed before her mind had fully caught up with what her instincts already knew. She threw open her door, and the hallway was clean, no smoke inside. But through the window at the end of the hall she could see light that should not have been there. "Caleb!" She was already running. He was already out of his room pulling his coat on, boots unlaced. "Where?" he said. "West," she said. "Outside." They hit the yard at the same moment Edgar and Tom came out of the bunkhouse, and the 4 of them stood for one terrible second looking at the supply barn with fire climbing the north wall. "Waterline," Caleb said. "Tom the pump. Edgar." "Already moving," Edgar said. "Eliza." "I'll get the horses clear," she said, because the horses were in the adjacent structure and she had already calculated that and was already running before he could tell her to stay back. She got the horses out. 3 of them panicked and hard managing, and she had blood on her palm from a lead rope that went tight wrong before it was over, but she got them clear and tied to the fence post far enough from the barn, and she turned back to see the men working the water line. They fought it for 2 hours. They lost the north wall of the supply barn and most of what was stored there, winter hay, some equipment, 2 months of preserved food stores. They saved the structure itself. When it was over, they stood in the yard in the dark and the cold and the smell of wet char, and nobody spoke for a long moment. Tom had a burn on his forearm, minor. Edgar's coat was ruined. Caleb's face was covered in ash and there was a cut above his eyebrow she didn't know the origin of. It started at the base of the north wall, Edgar said. He said it flat and certain. Not from inside, from outside. Everyone understood what that meant. We can't prove it, Tom said. I know we can't prove it, Caleb said. He looked at Eliza. She was holding her cut hand against her coat without thinking about it, and he crossed to her and took her wrist and looked at the palm without asking permission. And she let him because she was tired and her hand hurt, and she didn't have the energy at that moment to maintain distance. It's not bad, he said. I know, she said. He held her hand for a moment longer than strictly necessary to evaluate a cut. Then he released it. Get inside, he said. All of you. It's done for tonight. They went inside. Eliza sat at the kitchen table with her hand wrapped in a clean cloth and looked at the wall while Caleb poured whiskey into 4 cups and distributed them without commentary. And even she drank hers because there were nights when being practical about certain things was simply the right choice. Tom went to bed. Edgar went to bed. Caleb sat across the table and looked at his cup. He's not going to stop, Caleb said. No, she said. He'll keep going until there's nothing left to fight for. Or until we give him a reason to stop, she said. Caleb looked at her. The civil case, she said. Rourke said it was possible. We need to push Rourke harder. We need the other ranchers, the ones who lost land to Cross, to come forward. If there's a coordinated case, it changes the balance. Getting ranchers to come forward against Cross in this county is not. I know it's not easy, she said. But Whitfield knows everyone east of Dunmore. Ruth Whitmore's husband has connections in 3 valleys. And you, Caleb, you've been here for 15 years. There are people who respect you, people who are tired. He looked at her for a long moment. You want to build a coalition, he said. I want to survive February, she said. And then I want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else. The fire was still smoldering somewhere in the walls of the supply barn. Outside, the horses shifted on their lines. The lamp on the table burned between them, and Eliza's wrapped hand rested on the wood, and Caleb looked at it and then at her face. When I found you at that station, he said, I thought I was picking up something broken. She didn't look away. Most people would have left you there, he said. Most people would have kept writing. I know, she said quietly. I almost did, he said. The admission sat between them honest and slightly raw. I know that too, she said. I'm glad I didn't, he said. She held his gaze. So am I, she said. And for the first time in the weeks since she'd arrived, since the train platform, since the cold, since the 47 cents, and the thin coat and the empty world, Eliza Harper felt something shift in her chest that was not hope in the abstract cautious sense she'd been allowing herself. It was something warmer than hope. Something that was going to be very difficult to pretend she didn't feel. The next morning, she wrote 3 letters. One to James Rourke in Billings, telling him to begin preparing the civil case and asking what he needed to move forward. One to Daniel Whitfield explaining the broader situation and asking if he would be willing to speak to other ranchers in his area about the Holden contract scheme. And one, the hardest one, the one she sat with for the longest, to a name she had found in the oldest section of the county records that Rourke had sent with his letter. a rancher named Samuel Greer, who had sold his land to Cross 3 years ago, who had in the margin of one document in small tight handwriting written 2 words that Rourke had flagged and she had read 12 times. He lied. She sealed all 3 letters and handed them to Tom for the morning ride to town, and she went back to the kitchen table and she worked. Because the loan was due in February. Because a man had set fire to their supply barn. Because 2 people she'd never met had lost their land to a scheme she now had documented evidence of. And because Eliza Harper, who had arrived in Silver Falls with nothing, who had fallen asleep on a platform in the cold, who had once been so invisible, the world couldn't be bothered to notice her. That woman was not the same woman who was sitting at this table now. That woman had found something worth fighting for. And she had absolutely no intention of losing it. Samuel Greer wrote back in 11 days. Eliza was in the middle of a Thursday lesson with the children when Tom rode hard into the Whitmore yard and came to the door with his hat in his hand and a letter held out like it was something that might break. "Came on the morning stage," Tom said. "Caleb said bring it straight to you." She excused herself from the children, stepped outside, and read it standing in the cold. Samuel Greer was 63 years old and lived now in a rented room above a saloon in a town 40 miles east, which was all he had left after Cross took his ranch. His handwriting was the cramped, deliberate script of a man who had not written many letters, but was taking great care with this one. He wrote, "I have been waiting 3 years for someone to ask me what happened. I will tell you everything I know, but I will not put it in a letter. Come to me or send someone you trust. There are things that need to be said face to face." She folded the letter. She looked at Tom. "Tell Caleb I need to speak with him tonight," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She went back inside and finished the lesson, because the children were there and they deserved the full hour, and because Eliza had learned a long time ago that the work in front of you didn't stop being important just because the world was tilting sideways. But she counted the minutes. That evening she put the letter in front of Caleb and watched him read it. He read it twice, set it down, looked at her. "He knows something specific," Caleb said. "That's how it reads to me," she said. "The way he wrote it, he's been carrying this. Whatever he saw, whatever happened to him, he's been sitting with it for 3 years. If he'll testify. If he'll testify to the right things Rourke says, the civil case becomes criminal," Eliza said. "Cross isn't just looking at losing money. He's looking at prosecution." Caleb leaned back. "I need to go to him," he said. "I know." "Eliza, I'm coming with you," she said. He opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. "Greer wrote to me. He may not talk the same way to a man alone. And Rourke said we need a witness to any statement he makes, someone who can stand up later and say they heard it directly." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "It's a day's ride each way," he said. "I know. We'd be gone 2 days. Tom and Edgar can manage," she said. He picked up the letter again and looked at it. Not reading it, just holding it, and she could see him calculating the risks, the distances, the things that could go wrong, the way a man does when he's responsible for something he doesn't want to damage. "All right," he said. They left at first light 2 days later. The road to Greer's town wound east through cold, open country, and they rode with the buckboard moving at a steady pace, and the sky above them gray and low, with the particular weight of early winter. For the first hour, neither of them said much. Eliza had noticed that she and Caleb had 2 kinds of silence. The first was the silence of the early weeks, careful, measured 2 people assessing each other. The second was something different, something that had developed so gradually she hadn't noticed until one day she realized she could sit beside him for an hour without speaking and feel entirely at ease. This was the second kind. But today, something was underneath it. She felt it from him, a restlessness, a something to say that kept not getting said, and she didn't push, because she had learned that Caleb Morgan said things when he was ready to say them, and not before, and pressing him produced nothing except a slightly more deliberate silence. They were maybe 2 hours out when he said, "I haven't left Silver Creek for more than 2 days in 4 years." She looked at him. "Since Clara," he said. She waited. "After she died." He said, "The ranch was..." It was the only thing I could hold on to, the only thing that was still there every morning. He kept his eyes on the road. I stopped going places, stopped seeing people unless I had to, told myself it was practical. The ranch needed me. A pause. Maybe that was true, but mostly I just stopped. I understand that, Eliza said. Do you? When my mother died, she said, I spent a year in a very small room doing very small things. I told myself it was because I couldn't afford anything else, and that was partly true. But mostly it was because big things hurt and small things were safe. He glanced at her. What made you start again? He said. Doing bigger things. She thought about it. Hunger, she said. Eventually I was more hungry than I was afraid. Something crossed his face that was almost a smile. That's the most honest answer I've heard, he said. I'm a practical woman. You are, he said. And the way he said it was not neutral, it was something warmer than neutral, something that noticed her and was glad to notice her. The most practical woman I've ever met, who also stayed up until midnight writing a letter to a stranger who wrote 2 words in a margin. He lied, she said. 2 words and 3 years of grief behind them. That's not small. Caleb was quiet. No, he said. It's not. They didn't speak again for a while, but the silence was different now. Something had been let out into the open between them that had been living underneath the quiet for weeks, and it changed the quality of the air around them. She did not examine it too closely. She just let it be. Samuel Greer was a small man who had once been larger. She could tell that by the way he wore himself, the frame was still broad, but hollowed out the way men get when they've lost something they were built around. He was sitting at a corner table when they came in nursing coffee, and he looked up when they walked through the door with the eyes of a man who has been watching entrances for 3 years. He looked at Eliza first. You wrote me, he said. I did, she said, and sat down across from him without waiting to be invited. Caleb sat beside her. Greer looked at him. Caleb Morgan, Caleb said. Silver Creek Ranch. I know who you are, Greer said. Cross wants your land the same way he wanted mine. He looked back at Eliza. What do you need from me? Everything, she said. Start from the beginning. He started from the beginning. It took an hour. He talked about the contract similar to Caleb's with the same lawyer Holden, and how his grazing rights had been quietly amended in the filing. He talked about the merchant pressure, the way suppliers cut him off one by one. He talked about a loan he'd taken with the Territorial Bank in Silver Falls. Same bank, Eliza said. Same terms, Greer said. I just didn't have what you have. What do I have? She asked. He looked at her steadily. Someone who knew what to look for, he said. I'm a rancher. I run cattle. I'm not a man who reads contracts word by word or knows what a fraudulent filing date looks like. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. I had nobody to help me see it. The table was quiet for a moment. When the bank called the loan, Greer said, I went to Holden, because he was my lawyer, because I trusted him. His voice stayed flat, but it cost him something. He told me the only solution was to sell, that he'd negotiated a fair price from Cross better than I'd get in foreclosure, that I should be grateful. And you signed, Caleb said. I had no choice that I could see, Greer said. If I'd had another 6 months and someone telling me what they were actually doing. He stopped. But I didn't. Would you testify, Eliza said, to a lawyer in Billings, formally, everything you've told us? Greer looked at his cup. Cross still has connections everywhere in this territory, he said. I'm a man renting a room above a saloon. If I go against him publicly, you're already destroyed, Eliza said. Not harshly, plainly. He already took everything. What else can he do to you? Greer looked up at her. She held his gaze. He can do it to someone else, she said. There are other ranchers. There will be more. And right now you're the only person with direct experience of the whole scheme who's willing to talk. A long silence. I'm not willing yet, Greer said. I know, she said. But you will be. He stared at her. How do you know that? Because you wrote back, she said. A man who wasn't willing wouldn't have written back. Something moved across Samuel Greer's weathered face that she thought might have been a long time ago, the expression of a man who hadn't given up. I'll need to think on it, he said. Think fast, she said. We have until February. They rode back the next morning with Greer's conditional promise and a list of 3 additional names he'd given them. Other ranchers who had dealings with Cross and Holden and might be persuaded to speak if someone approached them right. Eliza wrote them all down while the buckboard moved, balancing the notebook on her knee, and Caleb watched her from the corner of his eye and said nothing until midday when they stopped to rest the horse. They ate from the provisions she'd packed, bread and salt beef and dried apple, and sat on the buckboard with the cold, clean air around them, and Caleb said without any particular preamble, "What happens to you if we lose?" She stopped chewing. "What?" "If the loan comes due and we can't make it," he said. "If Cross gets the ranch, what do you do?" She looked at him. "You don't have family east to go back to," he said. "You'd need a position somewhere. I want to know you'd—" He stopped, started again more carefully. "I want to know you'd be all right." She understood what he was really asking. She understood it clearly, and it made her chest do something complicated. "Caleb," she said, "we're not going to lose." "But if we're not going to lose," she said again firmly, and looked him in the eye. "And I need you to believe that. Because if you start making plans for losing, your whole approach changes, and I can't afford for your approach to change right now. I need you here, fully here." He held her gaze. "I'm here," he said. Quiet, certain. "Good," she said. She looked back at her notes. She was aware that her heart was beating somewhat faster than the situation strictly required. She kept writing. Rourke's letter arrived 3 days after they got back, and this one she read aloud to Caleb at the kitchen table because it required both of them. Rourke had found a 4th rancher, a man named Cal Deaver, who had sold to Cross 2 years ago, and who, unlike Greer, had already indicated willingness to testify. Rourke had also, through his connections at the Territorial Land Office in Helena, found evidence that Holden had filed similar contract amendments in 2 other counties, always on behalf of the same buyer, always Cross. "He's been doing this across the territory," Caleb said. "For at least 5 years, Eliza said. "Rourke estimates 4 ranches in this county alone, possibly 6 or 7 territory-wide." "That's not a scheme," Caleb said. "That's a system." "Yes," she said. "Which means the charges aren't just civil anymore. Rourke says the Territorial Prosecutor's Office in Helena has been notified. If Greer testifies and Deaver, it's enough to open a criminal investigation." Caleb sat with that for a moment. "Cross will know," he said. "When the prosecutor's office moves, he'll know before we do. He has people everywhere." "I know," she said. "He'll move on the loan," Caleb said. "He won't wait for February. He'll call it early, find some clause in the language, some technical default, and he'll try to foreclose before the investigation has time to gain weight." "Can he do that?" she said. "I need to look at the loan document again." She had it in front of him in 30 seconds. He read it slowly. She watched his face. When he set it down, his expression was careful and controlled in the way it got when something was bad, and he was choosing how to carry it. "There's a clause," he said. "Default can be called if there's material deterioration of the collateral property. It's vague enough that a sympathetic bank board could interpret the fire damage as qualifying." "The fire that Cross's people set," Eliza said. "Yes," Caleb said. "He burned my barn, and now he can use the damage as grounds to call my loan early." The particular ugliness of that sat in the kitchen between them. Tom, who had been sitting quietly in the corner pretending not to listen, said, "That's the dirtiest thing I've heard in my life." Nobody disagreed. Eliza picked up the loan document and read the clause herself twice carefully. Then she set it down. "We need to get to the bank before he does," she said. Caleb looked at her. "The board chairman is Cross's brother-in-law," he said. "The chairman, yes," she said. But there are 4 other board members. Do you know them? He thought. Haskell, he said slowly. Walt Haskell. He's been on that board for 12 years. He's not. I don't think he's Cross's man. He's just a businessman. Is he a fair one? I believe so. Then I want to talk to him, she said. Before the board meets. Before Cross can move. Eliza walking into a bank board member's office and asking him to hold off a foreclosure. I'm not going to ask him to hold off a foreclosure, she said. I'm going to show him what his bank has been used for. I'm going to show him Rourke's findings, the duplicate contracts, the falsified filing dates, the connection between the bank chairman and the scheme. She looked at Caleb steadily. If Haskell is a fair man, he'll understand that his bank's name is going to appear in a criminal investigation, and he'll have a choice about whether he wants to be seen as part of the problem or part of the solution. Caleb stared at her. You're going to leverage a bank board member with the threat of association with a fraud case, he said. I'm going to give him accurate information, she said, and trust him to make an intelligent decision. A pause. Those are the same thing, Caleb said. I know, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then something in his face broke open, not dramatically, not with any great display, but in the way of a man who has been holding something back for a long time and has just run out of the energy to keep holding it. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She went very still. I need to say something, he said. She looked at him. I know you told me not yet, he said. Weeks ago. I know you said finish it first. Caleb, I'm not asking for anything, he said. I just need to say it once. His hand was warm and heavy on hers, and his eyes were on her face, with that quiet, careful, almost frightened steadiness she'd seen before. You walked into this place with nothing, and you saw things I couldn't see, and you fought for something that isn't even yours, that you had no reason to fight for. And I don't know how to... He stopped. Started again. I have spent 7 years being careful about not needing anyone, and I can't do it anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp burned between them. Outside, the cold pressed against the walls, and somewhere in the barn, the horses shifted, and the world was very quiet. After February, she said. His brow drew together slightly. What? After February, she said again. When the loan is settled, and Cross is dealt with, and Greer has testified, and the case is in Rourke's hands. She turned her hand over under his, and let her fingers close briefly around his. Then we say what needs to be said, properly, when neither of us is fighting for our lives. He looked at her. And until then, he said, until then, she said, don't let go of my hand yet. He didn't. Walt Haskell agreed to a meeting. He was a small, precise man with wire spectacles and the organized desk of someone who took his professional reputation very seriously, and he greeted them with the polite wariness of a man who has been in banking long enough to know that people only request urgent private meetings when something is wrong. He was right. Eliza put the documents on his desk in a specific order. She had thought about the order, what he needed to see first, how the story needed to land to have maximum impact before he had time to raise his defenses. She started with the falsified contracts. He read without speaking. She put the Rourke letter beside them. He read that. She put the list of connected ranchers, the ones who had lost land, the ones prepared to testify, beside that. He took off his spectacles and rubbed the bridge of his nose. This is serious, he said. Yes, she said. It is. You're saying the bank has been used as an instrument of a coordinated land acquisition scheme. I'm saying the bank's chairman has a direct financial relationship with the man who directed the scheme, she said, and that the loan instrument used against Silver Creek Ranch follows the same pattern as loans used against at least 3 other ranches before foreclosure transferred those properties to the same buyer. Haskell put his spectacles back on. He looked at Caleb. You've been banking with us for 9 years, he said. I have, Caleb said. "You've never missed a payment. Not once." Haskell looked at the documents again. "If a criminal investigation opens," he said carefully, "and the bank's name is connected to this." "It will be connected," Eliza said. "Because the loan instrument is part of the record. The question is whether the bank is seen as a participant or as an institution that acted appropriately when the situation was brought to its attention." Haskell looked at her over his spectacles. "You're very young," he said. "Yes," she said pleasantly. "I am." A pause. "And very direct." "I find it saves time." He almost smiled. He looked at the documents for a long moment. Then he said, "I will need to review these with the board. The full board, not the chairman alone." "I understand," she said. "And I will need the name of the territorial prosecutor Rourke has been in contact with." "I have it here," she said, and put one more piece of paper on his desk. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Give me a week," he said. "You have a week," she said. "After that, the situation may move faster than either of us would prefer." They walked out of the bank into the cold Silver Falls street, and Caleb exhaled a long, slow breath and looked up at the sky for a moment. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. "You just walked into a bank and essentially told a board member that his chairman is a criminal." "I told him the documented facts," she said, "and I trusted him to draw conclusions." Caleb looked at her sideways. "Same thing," he said. "I know," she said. He laughed. It was not a big laugh. Caleb was not a man given to big laughs. But it was real, and it was the first time she had heard it, and it hit her somewhere unguarded. She looked straight ahead and kept walking and told herself very firmly that now was not the time. She was only partially successful. The week Haskell had asked for became 5 days. On the 5th day, a rider came to Silver Creek with a letter bearing the bank's seal. Eliza read it at the kitchen table with Caleb standing beside her, close enough that she could feel the tension in him, the held-breath quality of a man trying very hard not to hope too much. She read it. She set it down. She looked up at him. "The board convened an emergency meeting," she said. Haskell presented the documentation. The board voted 4-1 to suspend the default clause pending the outcome of the territorial investigation. The loan terms stand as originally written. February deadline. Caleb didn't move for a moment. 4-1, he said. "The chairman voted against," she said. "Haskell expects he'll resign before the week is out." "Cross will know by tonight," Caleb said. "Yes," she said. "He's going to be furious." "Yes," she said. "He's going to come at us harder." "He's going to try," she said. "But he's running out of clean moves. The prosecutor's office knows his name. Rourke has the documents. Greer is talking, and Deaver is already on record." She looked at Caleb. "He's been operating in the dark for 5 years. We just turned a light on." Caleb looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "The February payment," he said. "Whitfield's money and the cattle market gets us to within $60, she said. "I've been going over it every way I can. $60 short." "I have $60, Tom said from the doorway. They both turned. Tom stood there with his hat in his hand and his chin up and the expression of a young man who has made a decision and is not going to be argued out of it. 7 years of wages, Tom said. "I've been saving. Caleb, you've been fair to me every year I've been here, and I'm not going to stand in this kitchen and watch you lose this place over $60. Nobody spoke. Caleb's jaw worked for a moment. "Tom," he said. "I'm not asking." Tom said. "I'm telling. It's done." Caleb crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and grabbed Tom's hand and shook it. And Tom, who was 20 years old and not accustomed to being treated like a man whose decision mattered, went slightly red and looked at the floor. Edgar appeared behind Tom in the doorway. "Good," Edgar said. That was all he said. That was enough. Eliza looked at the 4 of them, the rancher who had stopped when everyone else rode past the young man with his 7 years of savings. The quiet man in the doorway who never wasted words. And she felt something she had no clean name for. Not happiness exactly. Something older and steadier than happiness. Something that felt if she was being absolutely honest with herself, like being home. She picked up her pen. She still had work to do. End of part 4. The letter from the territorial prosecutor's office arrived on a Monday. Eliza was teaching when it came halfway through a reading lesson with Petra, who had just sounded out her first full English sentence without stopping, and the pride on that child's face was so complete and so pure that Eliza almost didn't hear Tom's horse in the yard. But she heard it, and when she saw Tom's face through the window, she said to the children calmly, "Keep reading to each other. I'll be right back." And she walked outside and took the letter from Tom's hand before he'd fully dismounted. She read it standing in the cold. Then she read it again. "Well," Tom said, "the territorial prosecutor has opened a formal criminal investigation," she said, "into Nathaniel Cross, Arthur Holden, and 3 associated parties." She looked up. "They've issued a hold on all property transactions involving Cross pending the investigation. He can't buy, sell, or transfer land in this territory until it's resolved." Tom let out a breath that had been held for weeks. "And the bank," he said. "The chairman resigned 2 days ago," she said. "Haskell has been appointed acting chair. So Cross can't call the loan early." "Cross can't do anything," she said. "Not legally, not right now." She folded the letter. She looked at it in her hands for a moment. They had been fighting for 3 months. Through the fire and the merchant pressure and the forged contracts and the loan and the sleepless nights over ledgers that refused to balance and the $60 that Tom had given out of 7 years of wages that she was going to find a way to return to him if it was the last thing she did. 3 months. And now this. "Go tell Caleb," she said. Tom was already turning his horse. She walked back inside to her children. Caleb found her an hour later after the lesson ended, and the children had gone home, and she was packing up the books in Ruth Whitmore's kitchen, with Ruth pouring coffee. Neither of them had asked for, because Ruth expressed everything important through practical action. He came through the door, and she looked at his face, and she saw it the same thing she had seen on Tom's face, the same loosening, the same release of something that had been held at tremendous cost for too long. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. "You did this," he said. "We did this," she said. "Eliza. Caleb." It was Rourke's filing, and Greer's testimony, and Tom's $60, and Edgar, who thought of Whitfield and Ruth, who kept sending her children to class, even when the fake county official threatened her homestead application. It was all of it, all of us. "Eliza," he said again. She stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. "It was you," he said. "You found the list. You found Holden's filing. You found Greer's name in the margin of a document nobody else would have read twice. You walked into Haskell's office and put the truth on his desk and trusted him to be a fair man." He paused. "You were right about all of it." She held his gaze. "The letter," she said. "February. We make the payment," he said. "Whitfield's money came in last week. The cattle market held. Tom 60. He shook his head slightly. "We make it." Ruth Whitmore, who had been standing at the stove with her back diplomatically turned, said, "I'm going to go check on the children," and walked out with her coffee. The kitchen was quiet. "After February," Caleb said. He said it the way she had said it weeks ago, returning it to her like something he'd been holding carefully. She looked at him. "After February," she said. "That was the agreement," he said. "It was." "February is in 3 weeks." "I'm aware of that," she said. He took one step closer. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I want you to know that going in. It's been a long time since I've—" He stopped. Tried again. "I'm better with cattle and fence lines than I am with saying what I mean." "I've noticed," she said. "And yet you stayed," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I stayed because there was work to do," she said. "And because Silver Creek needed someone who could read a ledger. And because Tom and Edgar deserved breakfast." She paused. "And because you put your coat around a stranger on a train platform in the middle of the night and didn't ask for anything back." Something moved through his face. I didn't do that, he said. I just didn't leave you there. Caleb, she said quietly. That's the same thing. He stood very still for a moment. Then he said, stay. One word. Not a question, not a command. Something in between, something that was just honest. Not as the woman who keeps the books, he said. Not as someone with a room and $6 a month. His voice was low and careful. Stay because this is your place. Because you built it as much as I did. He held her gaze and didn't look away. Stay because I don't want to go back to what it was before you got here. I don't know how to do that anymore. Eliza Harper, who had spent her whole life being practical about everything, who had made hard calculations on train platforms and at kitchen tables and in bankers' offices with the careful precision of a woman who could not afford to be wrong. That woman stood in Ruth Whitmore's kitchen and felt every practical defense she had built around herself go completely, irreversibly quiet. Ask me again, she said. In 3 weeks. He almost smiled. 3 weeks, he said. After February, she said. After February, he said. Cross made his last move on a Thursday. Not a legal move. He had no legal moves left. The prosecutor's hold had seen to that, but Nathaniel Cross had not built what he'd built by accepting the loss of a battle without one final attempt to hurt the person who had beaten him. He came himself. That surprised everyone, including Eliza. She was at the kitchen table. She was always at the kitchen table when she heard horses in the yard, and something in the sound of it was wrong. Too many horses, too deliberate. And she was at the window before the thought had fully formed. Cross rode in with 4 men behind him. She had never seen him before. She had built his entire shape from documents and second-hand accounts, and the damage he left behind him. And now here he was, a large man well-dressed for the territory, with the particular confidence of someone who has always been the most powerful person in any room he entered. He was not in a room now. He was in Caleb's yard. Caleb came out of the barn. Tom and Edgar appeared from different directions the way men do when they've been working, but have been alert, waiting, half expecting something. Eliza walked to the door. She didn't open it yet. She listened. Morgan, Cross said. He stayed on his horse. I want to talk. You can talk from there, Caleb said. This has gone far enough, Cross said. His voice was controlled, a man accustomed to dictating terms. The investigation is a complication, but it's not a conclusion. These things take time, a lot of time. And in that time, accidents happen. Good people get hurt. He let that sit for a moment. I'm prepared to offer you fair market value for Silver Creek right now. Cash, enough for you to start over somewhere new. Eliza opened the door. She walked out. Cross looked at her. She had thought about what she might feel seeing him in person. Anger, certainly fear, possibly, the accumulated weight of 3 months of fighting his scheme from every angle. What she actually felt was something colder and cleaner than any of those things. She felt absolutely certain. Mr. Cross, she said. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has been told about a problem and is now seeing it in person for the first time. You must be the bookkeeper, he said. I'm Eliza Harper, she said, and I think you know why your offer isn't going to work. Miss Harper. He said it with the particular condescension of a man who has never in his life taken a woman seriously in a professional context. This is a conversation between ranchers. Then it's a very short conversation, she said, because Mr. Morgan's answer is no. She walked a few more steps toward him, not close, just closer. You're here because you've run out of legal options, and you hope that showing up in person with 4 men behind you might accomplish what your lawyers and your bank chairman and your fake county officials couldn't. Cross's expression shifted. Something hard moved through it. You have quite a lot to say for a woman who showed up in this county with nothing, he said. I showed up with exactly what mattered, she said, the ability to read a contract carefully. She met his eyes. Samuel Greer testified last Tuesday. Cal Deaver the Tuesday before. The prosecutor's office in Helena has 17 documents connecting your operation to 5 fraudulent land transfers over 4 years. She paused. You didn't come here to offer a fair price. You came here because you're frightened. The yard was very quiet. Cross looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. You're going to let a woman speak for you, he said. She's not speaking for me, Caleb said. She's speaking for herself, and she's right about all of it. Cross looked back at Eliza. She saw it. Then the calculation behind his eyes, the assessment, the rapid readjustment of someone who has walked into a situation and found it different than he expected. She had seen that look in the faces of lawyers in Boston when a document didn't say what they'd assumed. She had learned watching those men what it meant. It meant he was deciding how to retreat. This isn't over, he said. It's over for Silver Creek, she said. Whatever happens with the investigation, and I think we both know what's going to happen, you won't have this land. You won't have any land in this territory that you took by fraud. The courts will see to that. He looked at her for one more long moment. Then he turned his horse. He rode out without another word, his 4 men filing out behind him, and the sound of hooves on the cold ground faded west, and then was gone. Nobody in the yard moved for a moment. Then Tom said very quietly, Lord above. Edgar said nothing. But he looked at Eliza with an expression that from Edgar was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Caleb walked to where she was standing. He stopped beside her and looked out at the empty yard. You knew he'd back down, he said. I thought he might, she said. A man like that he only pushes when he thinks he can win. When he sees clearly that he can't, he goes somewhere else. She was quiet for a moment. He'll spend the next year fighting the prosecutor. He won't have time to think about Silver Creek. Caleb looked at her profile. 3 weeks, he said. She looked at him. 3 weeks, she said. The February payment went to the bank on the 14th. Eliza sat with the receipt in her hands for a long time after Haskell handed it across the desk. It was a plain piece of paper, ink and figures and a stamp. Not dramatic. But her hands were not entirely steady, holding it, and she didn't try to pretend they were. Haskell looked at her over his spectacles. Well done, Miss Harper, he said. Thank you for being a fair man, she said. He almost smiled. Thank your documentation, he said. It was very thorough. She folded the receipt and put it in her coat pocket and walked out to where Caleb was waiting with the buckboard. She climbed up. She sat beside him. She took the receipt out of her pocket and held it out, and he took it and looked at it. And then he did something she hadn't expected. He closed his fist around it just for a moment and pressed it against his chest and closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Then he opened his eyes and put the receipt in his own pocket and picked up the reins. Silver Creek, he said. Silver Creek, she said. They rode most of the way back in the second kind of silence, the one that held something instead of hiding it. And when they turned up the long drive toward the ranch house and the barn came into view, still carrying the char marks on the north wall that they hadn't had time or money yet to fully repair. Eliza felt something she had to actively manage in order not to show too plainly. She managed it. They came to a stop in the yard. Caleb set the brake. He turned to her. After February, he said. It's after February, she said. He looked at her with those dark, careful eyes that had been watching her since the night he carried her off a train platform, that had been learning her face across kitchen tables and buckboard seats and crisis after crisis for 3 months. I have something to show you, he said. She looked at him. He climbed down and offered his hand, and she took it and climbed down, and he didn't let go of her hand. The same hand she'd cut on the lead rope the night of the fire healed now, and he walked her around the side of the barn and up the slope behind it toward the south field. She knew where they were going before they got there. The meadow on the south side. He had mentioned it once in passing in the second week. May is buried in the meadow on the south side, and he had not mentioned it again, and she had not asked because some things a person shows you when they're ready and not before. He stopped at the edge of the meadow. There was a small marker, simple stone carefully placed with the name carved by a hand that had taken its time. May Morgan, beloved. Eliza stood beside him and said nothing. He stood with his shoulders straight and his hands at his sides, and she could feel standing this close to him the particular quality of a grief that has been lived with long enough to become not a wound, but a shape. Something that has changed the outline of the person carrying it permanently. Something that they have learned to carry without dropping. "I used to come up here every morning," he said. "First year, just to, I don't know, be here." He was quiet for a moment. Then it was every week. Then less. He looked at the marker. "I still come. But it's different now. It doesn't feel the same as it did." "Different how?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Like I'm telling her something instead of asking her something," he said. Eliza's throat tightened. "What are you telling her?" she asked softly. He looked at her. "That someone came," he said. "That the place is still ours." He held her gaze. "That I think she would have liked you." She didn't try to manage what happened in her face after that. She let it show. He reached up and brushed the edge of her jaw with his thumb, the most careful, tentative gesture, the gesture of a man who has been afraid of this for a very long time and is choosing not to be afraid anymore. "I'm going to ask you something," he said. "I know," she said. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not the room and $6, not the bookkeeping." He held her face with both hands now carefully like she was something he meant to keep. "I want you to stay, because this is your home. Because Silver Creek is yours." He paused. "Because I love you. And I have been trying not to say that for approximately 3 months, and I can't do it any longer." She looked at him. "Caleb Morgan," she said. "You pulled a stranger off a train platform in the middle of a Montana winter and gave her a bed and a wage and a reason to fight and a place where she mattered." Her voice was steady. "You think I don't know what that is?" "What is it?" he said. "It's love," she said. "It was love when you did it. You just didn't know yet." He looked at her for a moment. Then he kissed her. And Eliza Harper, who had arrived in Silver Falls with 2 dresses and 47 cents and a thin coat and a dead woman's brooch and absolutely nothing else, stood in the meadow above the south field and kissed him back with everything she had. The spring came slowly that year, the way it always did in Montana, grudging incremental one warm day, followed by 3 cold ones, as if the land itself wanted to be certain before it committed. But it came. The north wall of the supply barn was rebuilt in March. Tom supervised. Edgar did most of the heavy work, and Caleb built the corner framing himself, which Eliza understood was not just reconstruction, but something more deliberate, the reclaiming of a thing that had been damaged by someone else's malice. She watched him work and didn't say that. She didn't need to. Rourke wrote in March, with the first update from the prosecutor's investigation, Holden had accepted a plea arrangement and turned witness. Cross was fighting every charge which Rourke said was expected and which would ultimately not help him. The falsified contracts on all 5 affected ranches were being unwound by the territorial court. 2 of the ranchers who had sold under duress were being offered the opportunity to reclaim their land at the original purchase price. Samuel Greer wrote a separate letter directly to Eliza. He was brief, which was his way. "The court has offered me my land back. I've been sitting with that for a week. I think I'm going to go home. I wanted you to know. Thank you for the letter you wrote." Nobody else asked. She kept that letter in the tin box with her mother's brooch. The subscription school grew through April. She had 14 students by the end of the month, the original 7 plus 3 more from families she hadn't approached, who had heard from the Whitmores or the Garrittys, and showed up one Tuesday morning with children and quiet hopefulness. She needed more books. She wrote to a publisher in Boston who sent a catalog, and she spent an evening with Caleb going through it and deciding what to order, sitting at the kitchen table with their heads bent over the pages and their coffee going cold. And it was the most ordinary evening she had experienced in years. And she was aware sitting there of how much ordinary evenings could hold. "This one," Caleb said, pointing to a reader. "We already have 2 copies," she said. "Then we'll have 3, he said. "There's always a child who forgets theirs." She looked at him. He looked up. "What?" he said. Nothing, she said. She ordered 3 copies. Daniel Whitfield came back to Silver Creek in late April, ostensibly to check on the animals he'd purchased. Really, she suspected, because his wife had insisted on meeting Eliza, and Whitfield was a man who did what his wife insisted on without making a production of it. His wife, Margaret, was a tall woman with a firm handshake and the look of someone who had assessed the situation before she arrived and was simply confirming her conclusions in person. She came in, looked at the kitchen, looked at Eliza, looked at Caleb, looked at the way they moved around each other in the space. The unconscious choreography of 2 people who have learned to exist in close proximity to each other and have stopped thinking about it. And she said to Whitfield, "You were right," which appeared to settle some prior conversation between them. She shook Eliza's hand and said, "I hear you ran a fraudulent land scheme off this territory." "I read documents carefully," Eliza said. "Same thing," Margaret Whitfield said, and smiled. Eliza thought, "I like her." She said, "Sit down, I'll put coffee on." Margaret Whitfield sat at the kitchen table and looked around with an expression of plain, practical satisfaction. "This is a good house," she said. "It is," Eliza said. "It needs curtains," Margaret said. Caleb from the doorway said, "It has curtains." "It needs better curtains," Margaret said. Caleb looked at Eliza. Eliza looked at her coffee. She was smiling. She didn't try to stop it. The night Caleb asked her to marry him was not a dramatic night. It was a Tuesday in early May, after the teaching day after supper, after Tom and Edgar had gone to the bunkhouse, and the kitchen was quiet. They were sitting at the table, the same table where she had first laid out 6 names and changed the shape of everything. And he was reading the week's correspondence, and she was writing in the household ledger, and the lamp was burning between them. He put down the letter he was reading. He looked at her. She looked up. "I have a question," he said. She set down her pen. She waited. He reached into his shirt pocket and put something on the table between them. It was a ring, simple gold with a small dark red stone. Garnet. She looked at it. She looked at him. "I asked Margaret Whitfield," he said. "What kind?" He paused. "She said you'd know." Eliza picked up the ring. She held it. The garnet caught the lamplight and held it deep red, warm, the color of something that had been inside the earth a long time and come out worth keeping. "Caleb," she said. "I know I'm not easy," he said. "I know I'm quiet, and I'm set in my ways, and I spent 7 years turning myself into a man who didn't need much." He looked at her steadily. "I need this. I need you." A pause. "I need you to let me spend the rest of my life being a better man than the one I was when I found you." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about a train platform in October. She thought about a woman who had sold her winter coat to buy a ticket to a new life and arrived to find nothing. Nothing but 47 cents and a cold night and a stranger who stopped when everyone else would have kept riding. She thought about what she had been when she arrived. She thought about what she was now. "Yes," she said. She said it the way she said most things, directly, without decoration. The way of a woman who had learned that the clearest way to say something important was to simply say it. He reached across the table and took the ring from her hand and put it on her finger, and she looked at it there. The garnet catching the lamp, the gold warm from his pocket, and something settled inside her that she hadn't known was still unsettled. Something that had been waiting since Boston, since the train, since the cold platform where she had finally run out of road, waiting to arrive somewhere that held. She looked up at him. He was watching her with those dark eyes that had been learning her face for months, and what was in them now was not the careful remove she had first seen in them, the deliberate distance of a man who had decided that feeling things cost too much. What was in them now was everything he had been keeping back, all of it, warm and quiet and entirely hers. "After February," she said softly. He almost smiled. "After February," he said. The years that followed were not perfect years. No years ever are. There were hard winters and lean seasons, and the slow, imperfect work of 2 people, learning each other past the emergency, past the fight, past the crisis, into the ordinary dailiness of a shared life, which is harder in its own way and better in every way that matters. The school grew. By the following spring, it had outgrown Ruth Whitmore's kitchen, and Caleb built a dedicated schoolroom onto the east side of the Silver Creek house. And Eliza taught 22 children that year, and refused to charge families who couldn't pay, which was most of them, and managed the finances of it from the household ledger she kept with the same careful precision she had brought to everything. Tom stayed at Silver Creek. He fell in love with one of the Garrity girls, which surprised no one who had been paying attention, and they built a small house on the north edge of the property, and Tom continued to be the best young rancher in the valley, which also surprised no one. Edgar stayed because Edgar had always stayed and would continue to stay as long as there was work to do and coffee in the pot, and nobody asked him to say more than he meant. Samuel Greer came back to his land. He wrote to Eliza every few months, brief, careful letters, the letters of a man rebuilding something slowly. She wrote back every time. He never forgot that she had been the one to ask. Nathaniel Cross was convicted on 7 counts of fraud in the territorial court in Helena, a proceeding that took 14 months and produced testimony from 6 former ranchers and the full cooperation of Arthur Holden, who received a reduced sentence in exchange for everything he knew. Cross lost his properties. He lost his bank connections. He lost everything he had built on other people's land and other people's loss, which was exactly what such things deserved. Eliza did not feel triumph when the verdict came. She felt something quieter. She felt like the ledger had finally balanced. On the evening after the verdict arrived, a letter from Rourke, plain and factual, the way Rourke did everything she and Caleb walked up to the meadow above the south field. They stood at May's marker in the late spring light. Caleb stood with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders straight the way he always stood there, and Eliza stood beside him with her hand through his arm. They were quiet for a while. "I told her," Caleb said. "What did you tell her?" Eliza asked. "That it's all right," he said. "That it's good." Eliza looked at the marker, at the carved name, at the careful small stone that a grieving man had placed with his own hands in a meadow above the land he refused to lose. "Is it?" she said. "Good." He looked at her. He had the face of a man who had come a very long way from the person who had almost kept riding past a train platform in October, who had almost chosen one more time the easier thing, the safer thing, the thing that didn't risk anything because it offered nothing. He had not chosen that, and everything he had instead was in his face when he looked at her. "Yes," he said, simple, certain, the way he said the things that were most true. She looked at the meadow, at the sky above Silver Creek, at the land that had been fought for and nearly lost and held on to and made into something that would outlast every person who had tried to take it. She thought about a woman who had fallen asleep on a train platform with 47 cents and no one in the world who knew where she was. She thought about everything that woman had been afraid of. She thought about everything that woman had found instead. And Eliza Morgan, born Harper, made by every hard mile between Boston and Silver Falls, stood in the meadow above the south field with her hand through her husband's arm, and understood with the complete and unshakable certainty of a woman who had finally, after everything, arrived exactly where she was supposed to be, that some journeys begin in the worst possible place, so they can end in the truest one. She had been left behind. She had been forgotten. She had fallen asleep alone in the cold, with nothing left. And a lonely cowboy had stopped. And everything that mattered, every good and lasting and real thing in her life, had begun exactly there in that moment, when one man chose not to keep riding. Silver Creek Ranch stood for decades after that. Long after the people who tried to take it were forgotten. Long after the courtroom and the ledgers and the $60 and the letters to Billings had become family stories told at a kitchen table to children who had never known a world where any of it was in question. It stood because 2 people built it together. One who had refused to leave, and one who had refused to be left behind. And that in the end, in every version of this story, in every life where someone chooses to stop when the world keeps moving, that is always enough.